Hey, thanks for downloading this episode of the Daron Earlewine podcast. I want to hit you with an opportunity to partner with us this November. You may know Giving Tuesday is a global day of generosity, and this year it happens on November 29th. It's the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving, and this year our nonprofit Blackbird Mission that runs everything we do through the podcast, the book, Spiritual DNA, Pub Theology, all of our ministry is housed under a nonprofit called Blackbird Mission. And this year Blackbird has been given an amazing donation, an unlocking gift of $25,000. So anything we give, anything you give or anyone gives on Giving Tuesday up to $25,000 will be matched. And if we get there, that $25,000 gift will be unlocked. And that will enable us to continue to do the ministry that's reaching you, that's reaching people all over the world through the podcast, Spiritual DNA, the book, Pub Theology, everything that we do as a part of DaronEarlewine.com and Blackbird Mission. And if this podcast has encouraged you, maybe a friend of yours, it's brought value to your life, I'd just love to invite you personally to partner with us on Giving Tuesday and help us expand this mission. So blackbirdmission.com/give is where you can make a donation. Hopefully we're all connected through social media, and we'll be promoting this as we get closer to Giving Tuesday. I really appreciate you considering partnering with us financially to help us continue to expand this mission. Appreciate it. Let's jump into this episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Daron Earlewine podcast. We're cruising right along as we go chapter by chapter, The Death of a Dream, my first book. I want to thank you so much for downloading this episode. And listen, if you hadn't had time, we just did a redesign on my website, DaronEarlewine.com. If you've not gone over there and looked around, maybe head over there when you get and listen to the podcast. Check out the new work. Great work from our team. PJ and Daron did a great job on the podcast. They do a great job on the podcast, but great job on the web design, the redesign of the website. I want you to go check that out. So glad you downloaded this. If you're enjoying the podcast, as always, we'd love for you to subscribe either here, if you're watching on YouTube, or wherever you listen or watch the podcast, and maybe leave us a review. It really helps us grow the podcast and let other people know about it. We're going to jump in. Everybody, we're in chapter 4. This chapter is called Get Your Yoke On. And this chapter is it's very meaningful to me. I think I've talked maybe a few times here on the podcast about how meaningful, how important the image and the metaphor of being yoked with Christ is. If I had a short sleeve shirt on, I'd show you my tattoo. Used to wear a yoke necklace all the time because when it was 1993, a guy named Jimmy Johnson came to speak at my youth camp, and that's when I sensed God call me into ministry, and it's been a metaphor that shaped so much of my life. And so I thought it was important to include it in my story, in the book. I hope you enjoy this chapter, and I hope this podcast episode is meaningful and it helps you take your next step to become who you were born to be. The terminology, the metaphor there comes from the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30, where he says this: "Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." Matthew 11, 28 through 30. And here's the deal. This image, it seems almost like a contradiction, this idea of the yoke. The yoke is for service. It was worn by oxen to do work in the field. How is Jesus giving me something that is to work or to serve? How is that going to make my burden light? How's that going to make my life better if I'm feeling weary and carry heavy burdens? How am I going to go to work with Jesus? And I want to unpack some of that. I think it's going to make a lot of sense. I want to read you something from the book on page 29. It says this: Jesus reveals through this analogy that we were created to be divinely supported in ways that make our lives work less burdensome and more impactful. Being yoked with him is not some generic one-size-fits-all situation. It's a picture of how Jesus invites us to bring our unique strengths and dreams in alignment with his. As a result of being yoked with him, metaphorically, we're not constantly pulling and tugging in opposition to the person we were created to be. We were never meant to work with an ill-fitting burden intended to hold us down or control us. And that's so much the beginning image I want us to have. Um, Actually, I want to read a little more for you guys too. Check this out. It says this. What a relief it is to learn that being yoked with Christ creates a life of eternal connection to his love, support, and understanding. It wasn't a heavy, counterproductive burden. Mine was designed to fit me like spandex, not khaki canvas. And I'll explain that in a minute, why that makes sense. That was an important thing for me to hear from Jimmy Johnson on that summer night in 1993. I'd been so afraid. I'd been so afraid my life was going to suck if I entrusted my dreams to God. Rather, I was finally beginning to understand that his dreams and mine were two sides of the same coin. And I tell the story in here, and I've told it to you guys in the podcast, and if you've listened to the podcast before, just that journey for me to trust God was difficult. I would say, for me to get my head in the hole of the yoke was so challenging because I didn't trust God not to screw up my life. Everything that I dreamed, everything that I wanted to accomplish, I just couldn't see how it made sense. And I tell the story in there about the missionaries that came and visited our church, and they always had these khaki, like 4-pocket shirts, and I wanted to be this rock star. I wanted to wear spandex. Maybe if that was maybe no spandex, hard to say, but I just couldn't figure it out. And so this was a real risk for me to trust God in this way. And I know it is for you too. And there are a couple paths I think we go down as we're trying to avoid and maybe keep our sense of individuality, or as we battle to trust God. And I think the two dominant ways that we try to avoid being yoked with Christ are either religion or rebellion. And religion was my jam, not necessarily rebellion. And you never really had like the, in my high school or growing up years, the crazy rebellious stage that I went through. That's another chapter of the book. I decided to do that at about 29, a little more dangerous. But religion was my jam. And a lot of times that gets confusing because we associate the things of God with religion. But one of my favorite quotes, I think it's from Bono, from U2. He says that religion is what happens after God leaves the room, right? And God leaves the room, and we make up rituals, we make up structure, we make up rules, we make up protocols to make up for the absence of God. And sometimes if we grow up a ton inside the building or inside the room of religion, we may have not realized that we left Jesus outside. And he doesn't invite us to a religion. Jesus didn't say, come to me and become religious. He said, no, come to me in relationship, and you will find what you were created for. And rebellion, that's obviously a pretty popular route that a lot of people go on. I'm afraid to trust God with the good stuff of my life. I'm afraid that maybe he's going to make me religious, or he's going to make me a fanatic, or whatever it may be. And so a lot of people run from God in rebellion. Both of these have really dire consequences to us and will lead us into a place where we don't become who God created us to be. We don't want that. That's not Jesus' invitation to us. His invitation is to be yoked. And here's the thing that's interesting about this is as we're trying to figure out that whole process, we believe the thought that the option is either wear the yoke of Jesus or be free on my own. And one of the things that Jesus and in other places in the Word of God unpacks for us is the reality is that everyone wears a yoke. We're all wearing a yoke to something. We're either a slave to sin, as the Word of God would say it, right? A slave to our sin, and in some was connected or yoked up with the enemy of our souls, with the devil, or we're yoked with Christ. So there's not really an option to be free of and just you're your own person. You do whatever you want. We're all wearing a yoke. The question comes down to is who are we yoked together with? Who are we in relationship with? And who is sharing or carrying the burdens of our life and moving us forward? And that was a tough thing for me to get my mind around. But as I began to, it began to change a lot for me. And here's some of the beautiful things that I want you to understand as you consider being yoked with Christ is not only does everybody wear one, but you have to decide which invitation you're going to receive. But the beautiful thing is that Jesus has handcrafted a yoke for you. And the yoke of Jesus brings purpose, and the yoke of Jesus brings healing. And I want to read this from the book for you, from page 30. And here I'm taking you back in this chapter to the day on the mountaintop, Prescott, Arizona, where I heard this sermon. And I talk about in this chapter that the tough thing for me was, as I went forward and accepted a call to ministry, is the youth pastors come down, everybody comes down, and it's like this great moment where everybody's crying because, oh, look at this next generation of kids that feel called to be yoked with Jesus. And I felt really special about that. Now I could go home that next day and say, hey, you know what? My life's going to be different because I feel called by Jesus. I'm yoked with Christ. And I was. And at that point, it did change my life. This one of the next chapters we're going to talk about in the book, actually, I think it's the next chapter, is I got yoked with Christ, and it led me to move from Arizona to Indiana. I went to pursue this calling, and everything in my life began to change. And went to college, get a degree, right, the whole deal. And after that, I get ordained, and everybody's calling me Pastor Daron because I had a call to ministry when I was at this camp. And it changed everything about my life to sense this calling that God had on me. The tragedy of that night is there were about 20 of us that felt called, 20 of us that walked out and felt like, yeah, man, I'm yoked with Jesus. What breaks my heart, and what I write about here on page 30, is the hundreds of kids that were there. And maybe this is you. You never had a moment where you were like, yeah, I just felt like called to full-time ministry in a church somewhere. So, when you write about this, about being yoked with Jesus, that's just for the special people. That's just for guys like you or girls like them. No, it's for all of us. And it breaks my heart that there are so many people that don't understand that. And so here's what I write in page 30. It says this: what I now know to be true is that every single person in that room was called by God to accept the light, supportive, custom-created yoke that was created for them by the master creator. For generations, well-meaning people have taught kids, and adults too for that matter, that some people are called and everyone else is on their own. I wish I could go back to that night on that mountain in Prescott, look every one of those students in the eyes and say, every single one of you are called to God's dreams. Whether your dream is full-time ministry or not, God has unique dreams that are tailored just for you. No matter what path you choose for your career, you have the potential to change the world. And I hope that sets with you. Christ has made a unique yoke for you to wear. It's infused with what we talk about here often on the podcast, right? Your spiritual DNA. That right now, as you step into a relationship with Jesus and you're yoked with him, you have everything you need to become everything he's created you to be. It's within you, and it's held within that yoke that he's called you and he's created and crafted for you. Everyone here is our yoke. It's uniquely created. And here's the other thing that's cool about it, is that the yoke brings healing. And I can remember as Jimmy would teach about this, and this story really stood with me, is the tough part is whether we've been wearing a yoke of religion or we've been wearing a yoke of rebellion. When we wear ill-fitting yokes, or when animals would wear ill-fitting yokes, they would cause damage. They would cause hurt. They would cause the animal to get to the place with, whether it be sores or calluses or whatever it could be, that they would become disabled. They would no longer be able to do what they were created to do because they were injured by an ill-fitting yoke. In Jewish tradition, check this out, this is beautiful. Jewish tradition says that Jesus was such a master carpenter, and had such love for the animals that were brought to him, that Jewish farmers from miles around would bring their disabled and hurt animals to Jesus to create custom yokes. And Jewish tradition says that Jesus's yokes fit so well on each animal that those that were hurt would actually be nursed back to health, actually redeemed from the pain they had gone through wearing ill-fitting yokes, and be able to step back in to fulfill the purposes for which God put those animals on earth. And the true is same for you. Is if you've been out and you read this book because part of the death of your dream was how being involved in maybe some kind of a religious situation made you, injured you, kept you separated from God. Or maybe you went out and you were wearing a yoke of rebellion. And you feel like right now, listen, I think I'm too far from God to experience this resurrection of purpose you're right about, Daron. You're not. Is when we accept the invitation to be yoked with Christ, the custom-made yoke that he's made just for you, it fits so well, it can bring healing into your life. I want you to know that. I want you to believe that because it's true. It's true about you and it's true about him. Ephesians 2:10 says this, and we share this passage all the time on the podcast because it's so true. It says this, that we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. There's a custom-made yoke for you that allows you and enables you to move through life, to find healing, to find purpose, to find meaning, to find impact in life, to fulfill the purposes that God planned for you long ago, before you were even born. Page 32, it says this, He has always intended for us to walk alongside Christ through the ups and downs and everything in between. I can say now there's no doubt God was cheering me on during the greatest moments of weeping, cheering me on during the greatest moments and weeping with me in the moments I didn't think I could survive. If he did that for me, he'll do it for you too, right at this very moment. Last thing I want to leave you with is this too, is I love these stories. And like I said, a lot of this podcast series, these are a lot of the stories and a lot of the content that I hoped would make it into the book, and they ended up on kind of the editing room floors. And so I'm glad that in this podcast series, we're able to bring you some of the extra content that I hope takes reading the book and being involved in maybe a small group discussion group to the next level for you. But this is a story that Jimmy would share as well, and the idea that the yoke was used for discipline and also for maturity. And so Jimmy told a story one time about how he was driving down a farm road, and he saw two oxen yoked together grazing in the pasture. And right as he drove past it, he thought, that's kind of weird. He's like, why are those oxen still yoked together, like grazing? Because the reality is that in the morning, right, the farmer would put the yoke on the oxen. They would go out and do their job, plow the field, whatever, service they needed to do around the field. And then as they were put out to pasture, right, for the evening, they would take the yoke off, and they were free to graze and do whatever they wanted to do until they went back to work the next day. So he thought it was weird that these two were yoked together. So Jimmy says he pulls off. He finds the farmer in his barn, and he says, "Hey, sir, can I ask you a question?" He's like, "I noticed that you have some oxen out there, and they're still yoked together, grazing in the pasture." He was like, I don't understand what's going on. So he said, this old school farmer, he said he was like leaning back on a fence or something. He said, "Well, sir," he said, "you see that young oxen on the left?" I said, "Yeah, yes, sir, I do." He said, "Well, that oxen loves to jump fences. And that causes a lot of problems for him, and it causes a lot of problems for me." Jimmy said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Well," he said, "you see that older ox on the right?" He said, "Yes, sir." "He don't." And that was a conversation, and it made sense, right? Is the reason they were still yoked together was because this young oxen needed to learn some discipline. He had some maturing to do, and left on his own, he was going to keep jumping fences, and he was going to keep injuring himself and causing issues to the farmer. In your life right now, your issue may be that you are not yoked with Jesus, and you still like jumping fences. And the reality is this, is that God is not your punisher in this, right? Is sin has its own punishments in its life, its own consequences that it brings into our life and our journey. You may be at a place right now where you're just realizing, man, I'm jumping a lot of fences in my life, and it's these character issues, it's these discipline issues that are keeping me from becoming who God's created me to be. Well, here's the invitation. It is to get yoked with Jesus, to walk with him, because Jesus doesn't like jumping fences. And when you're yoked together with him, the yoke of Jesus will bring discipline and maturity into your life that will enable you to step into the calling that he's custom made for you in the yoke that you wear. The last thing I want to give you is this story, and this one I love, is the yoke is for life. And from the day I was on that mountain in Prescott and accepted this invitation from Jesus by the grace of God to be yoked with him, to walk with him for life, I know now that I'll never be alone. He'll never leave me. He'll never forsake me. And I will walk with him all the days of my life until I see him face to face. And so can you. And to kind of highlight this, Jimmy Johnson would tell this story. He said one time he was on a missions trip in Southeast Asia. And he said they would watch these Southeast Asian farmers take their oxen out to do work every day. And he said it was interesting because at the end of the day, what he would notice is that this farmer would unhitch the oxen from the yoke, and he would carry the yoke home every day after they worked. And he said he saw that the farmer do this two days in a row. And then he was the next day, and he said, I've got to find out, like, it's not that far of a walk from, why is he taking this heavy yoke and why is he carrying it back and letting these oxen just walk? And so Jimmy went over and he said, hey, can you explain to me why you take the yoke off the oxen and why do you carry it back to the barn every day? And the farmer looked at him, he said, it's an expression of gratitude. He said, I love these animals. And he said, they have served me well all day long. And so he said, I want to carry the yoke back to their rest to let them know that I'm thankful for their good and faithful service in that day. And the reality for you and me is this, is there will be a day, hopefully that, and I hope you've already decided that you get yoked with Jesus and you walk and serve and allow him to carry the burdens and the joys of life with you to become who he's created you to be, to step into this purpose that he's created for you. But there will be a day when this life is done, and I can't wait. I can't wait to see Jesus face to face as he takes this yoke off that I've worn my life, all my whole life, and walks me into the rest that he's prepared for me, walks me into heaven and says, well done, my good and faithful servant. Enter the rest that I have prepared for you. And I will never wear the yoke again, but I will be grateful for every day in this life that I was able to walk and to work right next to Jesus. And I hope you're experiencing that joy. I hope you're experiencing that healing. I hope you're experiencing the step-by-step of maturing and discipline that Jesus is teaching you as you step into becoming who you were born to be. It's such a crucial step, and I hope you're stepping into it today. If not, here's the really amazing thing. You can start today. The invitation to be yoked with Jesus is something by grace. You can't earn it. You can't buy it. You don't get it because you're special or because he loves you more than other people. You get it because Jesus died for the sins of the world to remove every barrier between us and him so that we could once again be yoked with him, work with him, be loved by him, be healed by him. And so if you've never taken this step to accept this invitation, today's the day. And you can say it however you want in your own words and your own, the way that you would say it. I just want you to be honest and authentic about it, but say, Jesus, I want to receive your invitation. I've been wearing a yoke of rebellion, or I've been wearing a yoke of religion. And bottom line is I'm weary and I'm burdened and I'm broken and I need rest for my soul. So I want to accept your invitation to be yoked with you. Teach me what it means to walk with you. Teach me what it means to work with you. Bring healing and rest to my soul that you bought for me with your death and your resurrection. Jesus, I receive your yoke. It's the greatest decision that you could ever make. And if you made that today on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email. Send an email to Daron@blackbirdmission.com. I'd love to talk with you and help you figure out what are some next steps for you as you take these steps being yoked with Jesus. And I hope this walkthrough through chapter 4 of the book was inspiring and encouraging to you. And I just can't say thank you enough for joining us on the podcast and downloading these episodes, going through the book. It means so much to me to walk yoked with Christ with you. So until we talk again, remember these 3 things. God's for you, not against you. He's near you, not far away. He's near you because you're yoked together, walking right next to him. And he's created you on purpose and for a purpose. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Daron Earlewine podcast.